Surah al-Anbiyā contains a fascinating sequence of verses when read as a whole. The surah begins with the migration of Prophet Ibrahim, to the Blessed Land, then moves to the emergence of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog, near the end of time, and finally concludes with the promise that the earth will be inherited by the righteous servants of Allah. Some researchers view this arrangement of verses as a historical and eschatological narrative centered on the Holy Land of Palestine and the city of Jerusalem, Bayt al-Maqdis. According to this reading, Surah al-Anbiyā portrays a historical journey that begins with the granting of the Holy Land to Prophet Abraham, followed by the rise of a great power in the end times that comes to dominate Jerusalem, and ultimately concludes with the return of the Holy Land to the believers through divine intervention. Allah says, "And we delivered Abraham and Lot to the land which we had blessed for all peoples." Surah al-Anbiyā, or Surah 21, verse 71. Classical Muslim commentators generally understand this verse as referring to the region of Greater Syria, Bilad al-Sham, which includes Palestine, Jerusalem, and its surrounding areas. This verse demonstrates that Palestine is not merely a geographical territory, but a land chosen by Allah as a center of prophetic history. It was here that many prophets were sent, revelation descended, and the struggle for monotheism unfolded throughout history. From this perspective, Surah al-Anbiyā begins its narrative with the granting of the Blessed Land to Prophet Abraham, the father of the prophets and a central figure in the Abrahamic tradition. Allah then says, "And it is forbidden for a city which we have destroyed. They should not return." Surah 21, verse 95. According to this eschatological interpretation, the city, Qaryah, mentioned in this verse, refers specifically to Jerusalem, Bayt al-Maqdis, the holy city that has repeatedly experienced destruction, conquest, exile, and changing political control throughout history. The verse is interpreted as indicating that Jerusalem will once again flourish and attract worldwide attention once the prohibition is lifted through the release of Ya'juj and Ma'juj. Allah says, "Until when Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog are released, and they surge down from every elevation." Surah 21, verse 96. The majority of Muslim scholars understand Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog, as real human peoples who will emerge shortly before the Day of Judgment. However, some symbolic interpretations view Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog, as a civilizational movement or global force that produces major transformations in world history. Within this interpretive framework, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog, are associated with modern Zionism, which succeeded in gathering Jewish communities from across the world into Palestine and Jerusalem. Supporters of this interpretation argue that the connection between verses 95 and 96 is highly significant. Verse 95 speaks about the return of the inhabitants of a city that had previously been subjected to a divine prohibition, while verse 96 describes the release of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog. According to this interpretation, the sequence of verses suggests a cause and effect relationship. The release of Ya'juj and Ma'juj marks the lifting of the divine prohibition over Jerusalem, allowing the city to be restored through the Zionist movement and repopulated by Jewish communities from the diaspora. Some also associate this restoration with Jewish aspirations to rebuild the Third Temple. Within this interpretive framework, Ya'juj and Ma'juj are understood as representing the modern Zionist movement, or the wider global forces associated with it. According to this reading, the phrase, "They surge down from every elevation," is understood as depicting the convergence of a global movement arriving from many nations and continents to resettle Jerusalem. The large-scale migration of Jewish diaspora communities to Palestine during the 19th and 20th centuries is viewed as the historical manifestation of this process. In numerous authentic hadiths, the region of Greater Syria, Sham, is described as a blessed land and the focal point of many major events preceding the Day of Judgment. The Prophet said, "When the people of Sham become corrupted, there will be no goodness left in you." This hadith presents Sham, with Jerusalem at its spiritual center, as a barometer of the moral and religious condition of the Muslim Ummah. The Prophet signaled that when Sham and its people become corrupted, that corruption reflects a broader corruption within the Muslim community, because Sham is one of the centers of blessing, faith, and struggle in the end times. For this reason, some researchers view the conflict centered on Jerusalem as more than merely a geopolitical conflict. They regard it as part of an eschatological drama long foretold in Revelation. Within this framework, Zionist control of Jerusalem is seen as a historical phase preceding divine intervention at the end of time. After mentioning Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog, Surah 21 or Surah al-Anbiyā presents a profound promise. And indeed, we have written in the Psalms after the reminder that my righteous servants shall inherit the earth. Surah al-Anbiyā, verse 105. Some commentators explain that the reminder refers to the Torah, while the Psalms refer to the book of David, Dawood. They also interpret the term al-Ard, the land or the earth, in Surah al-Anbiyā, verse 105, as referring specifically to the Holy Land of Sham and Palestine, rather than the entire world in a general sense. This interpretation is based on the context of the verse, which mentions the Torah and the Psalms, two scriptures closely connected with the history of the Israelite prophets in that land. Accordingly, the verse is understood as a promise that the Holy Land will ultimately be inherited by Allah's righteous servants. Thus, the verse indicates that the promise of the righteous inheriting the land of Sham had already been established in the earlier scriptures. In the context of Palestine, the verse is interpreted as a guarantee that the rule of any power opposing Allah's will cannot endure forever. Rather, the Holy Land will ultimately return to those who uphold justice and believe in Allah. Authentic hadiths explain that Jesus will descend in the end times to defeat the Antichrist, Dajjal, and establish justice on earth. After the era of great tribulation comes to an end, peace will return, and a government founded upon truth and justice will be established. Within this interpretive framework, Surah al-Anbiyā or Surah 21 depicts three major stages in the history of the Holy Land. 1. The granting of the blessed land to Abraham and his faithful descendants. Surah 21 verse 71. 2. The transformation of Jerusalem into a global center and prosperous city through large-scale Zionist Jewish settlement associated with the release of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog. Surah 21 verses 95 to 96. 3. The inheritance of the Holy Land by Allah's righteous servants as promised in the Psalms. Surah 21 verse 105. The descent of Jesus is viewed as the culmination of this process, when oppression is ended and Allah's promise concerning the inheritance of the land is finally fulfilled. When read thematically, Surah al-Anbiyā may be seen as a narrative that begins with Abraham in the land of Palestine and ends with the victory of the righteous in that same land. According to this eschatological interpretation, Surah 21, verse 71, refers to the beginning of the Holy Land's history under Abraham. Surah 21, verses 95 to 96, foretell the return of Jerusalem as a center of world attention following the release of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog. While Surah 21, verse 105 promises that the land will ultimately be inherited by Allah's righteous servants. Within this reading, the rise of Zionism and the flourishing of Jerusalem under Jewish settlement are viewed as one of the final phases of history preceding the descent of Jesus before the fulfillment of Allah's promise that the blessed land will return to those who believe and establish justice.